What's up, everybody? I just had an awesome interview with Eric Perner from Rep Provisions. So, they basically follow some very strict regenerative farming practices and they offer products you can buy at home, whether it's steak, chicken, or if you live locally to them, you can even buy half a cow, but you actually have to go there and pick it up from them. But in our interview today, Eric and I talked about a lot of things about regenerative farming, how it can fix the soil, how it can fix our diets, and how a lot of farmers should maybe start paying attention to this in terms of livestock, soil health, better calories for us all to eat, which is really neat. So, here is a quick little clip from my interview with Eric about how he came from an oil and gas background. That was his degree. He got an engineering degree and later on went into that. And then how he eventually wound up back farming and following kind of his dad's regenerative farming practices. And it's kind of cool how that all went kind of full circle. So check out this clip and listen to the full interview, which will be in the description of this video. And also check out Rep Provisions at the link below. So check it out. I think you'll like it. In terms of coolest backgrounds that we've had on the show, I think yours might take the cake. You've got a really good background with the deer head up there and everything.
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't. It's hard to find the right background for these things, so I just set it right up in my living room. So I figured
No,
it's
that's perfect. I mean, I feel like it gives it a really good character. What you've got a deer and a bison up there. I mean, just to
I
name a
do.
few.
Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty cool. All right. Well, Eric, welcome to the Farm Traveler Podcast, man. How are you doing?
Great, Trevor. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So you have got this cool company called Rep Provisions, and it looks like you guys are basically kind of providing consumers with great raised. Keyword here is regeneratively raised meat. So I mean, we're gonna get into this in the episode, like what that is. But before we dive into that, kind of tell us about your background and how you wound up kind of starting Rep Provisions.
Yeah. So I grew up on a small farm in Oklahoma, and I was we had multi-species operation from cattle to goats to chickens and those things, but very small operation, just enough to provide for our family. My dad was very much kind of this regenerative mindset before that was even a term.
Okay.
So before that was cool. He was in that mindset. So I learned that at a pretty young age. And I was very passionate about, I was a big hunter and loved wildlife and loved, actually providing habitat for wildlife. My dad kind of kept me in this mindset of how you kind of need to work with nature, not against it, to grow
Mhm.
our food. And so that was kind of instilled in me at a young age. But as I grew up, I just watched all these farms and ranches around us, which kind of just pretty much, were very extractive, intensive operations that were not fitting my context at all. So it really, kind of had me down on ag and really didn't feel the desire to go that path, after I left the farm. So I went to college and got an engineering degree.
Mhm.
And that degree led me to a career in the oil and gas exploration industry. So after a pretty long career in that, which basically I went from, kind of being dismissive of extractive agriculture, but went to that to the most extractive industry there is.
Yeah.
And after, a couple decades in that industry, I was being called back to the farm and really kind of had a passion to come back and do it right, do it differently. Um, and I had purchased a place that I'm on now in 2006 and began trying to restore it just for habitat, not really to grow animals or wasn't even thinking long term about food or anything of that nature, but just how can I improve habitat? But really, what I come to find out is, animals on land are a necessary piece of good soil, number one, but also providing all these great other outcomes that I want for whether it's grassland bird habitat or different species of pollinators. Animals actually fit really nicely into that. I discovered an organization called the Savory Institute, which is out of Boulder, Colorado, which is how we get all of our land bases regenerative verified. And they really teach this concept in a whole other level across the world that really inspired me to kind of shift all our practice to their holistic management. And so went through all their training. That took, a couple years, and then began to start the ranching operations back up with multi-species. But I started to wonder, hey, this is great that I'm kind of doing these things and I can have great outcomes. But if I have to sell back into this conventional market, meaning, animals go to, a livestock sale and they go to a feedlot and then to the consumer at the end of the day, I didn't see that really worth it. It didn't really fit where I wanted to be. So that's where I dreamed up this company, direct to consumer company called Rep Provisions, where actually we can communicate directly with the consumer and tell them our story. Ideally, it would, if we're going to grow a better product, ideally we'd be compensated for that better than we could in a conventional market. And so that was the idea behind that, to really tell that story of regenerative, what we're doing, what our farmer network's doing, and then allow those folks to, go straight to their consumer and say, hey, this is a higher value product. And we think, these farmers should be compensated a little bit differently. So that's kind of how that, in a nutshell, went from, this highly extractive oil and gas to where we're pumping carbon and burning carbon quickly, where we're getting back to regenerative practice, where we're putting carbon back in the soil. So kind of come full loop in that regard.
Yeah, kind of going back to that. I mean, would you say that there was a moment where, you're working in oil and gas where was there a moment where you decided to go back to the farm, go back to farming and kind of follow your dad's idea on regenerative farming? Or was it kind of like, kind of like a slow process of going back to that?
Yeah, it was a kind of a slow process for me because, certainly you're kind of scared to jump into something. Farming is literally the hardest occupation in the world that
Hmm.
pays the least, right? I mean, I think anyone who's done that understands this concept, and that really needs to change, for one. But yeah, so I didn't want to jump right back from having a really firm, you know, uh, financial backing and jump headfirst into this and just be struggling. But built it up slowly over time and got to a point where, I did quit my day job and just focused on the ranch and the business full time.